Welcome back 7th grade to the next segment of the online guitar course. In this video we will cover the dominant 7th chord. With the addition of one extra note to the major chord, we now find more possibilities to work with and practice. Let's turn it over to Mr. Nyman with the first 7th chord.
Seventh chords. Now, what we're going to start with 7th chords, we're actually going to start with our G7 chord. Now, from our major chords, let's take the same ideas that we talked about with our major chords. Right now, the only thing we don't know about is that 7 after the G. What does the 7 mean? Well, let's work with what we do know. We know that G looks like this, with a G, a B, and a D, stacked in thirds, 3 notes. We know on the fretboard that our first finger goes on the 2nd fret on the A string, our 2nd fret goes E string 3rd fret, 3rd finger B string on the 3rd fret, and 4th finger E string on the 3rd fret. So how do we make that G chord a 7th chord? Well, let me first talk about the bottom here. To make a 7th chord, you're going to add an additional third to any major chord. Let me clean this up here a little bit. My handwriting is awful. Okay. So 7th chords add an additional third to any major chord. So let's add another third. We're going to add the F above the D. And now we have G, B, D, F, and we have our G7. Let's see what that actually sounds like here. Here's our G chord without the 7th. Now we add the 7th. We add another note, a 4th note. And there's our 7th chord. Again, there are 4 notes in a 7th chord, not 3. Now on the guitar, what we're going to do to add that other note is we're going to change our fingers around here a little bit, and we're going to go to this kind of a pattern. Okay? Now this is where our first finger is. First finger on the E string. Our 2nd finger is going to go on the A string, and our 3rd finger is going to go on the big E string. And the 3 notes in the middle are going to be open. And there's our G7 chord. Let's see how that looks like on the guitar. 7th chords. This is going to be our first of our 4 7th chords. Now remember, what we just learned from our fretboard is that a 7th chord just adds another third on top of our triad, which was our major chord. Now for our first 7th chord, we're going to work with a G7. Now remember, this was our G chord. The 2 notes that are going to be exactly the same between G7 and G are going to be this A string 2nd fret and this E string 3rd fret. We're going to take our 2nd and 3rd finger and put it there, and then take our first finger and stretch it all the way to the bottom on the 1st fret of the skinny string way down here, and use all 6 strings for our G7. The next 7th chord we're going to talk about is D7. Now I'm going to leave our notes over here in the right-hand margin so we remember that to make a 7th chord, we can take any major chord and add an additional third on the top. Now let's go with what we know about D. D uses the notes D, F sharp, and A. Here's what that sounds like. Here's what it looks like on the fretboard. Now I'm not going to put numbers or open strings, not used strings in right now because we're going to change things up for D7. So to make this a 7th chord, to make this D chord a 7th chord, we're going to add our additional third on top to make it sound like this. In the fretboard, we're going to take that finger that was in the 3rd fret and we're actually going to put it up here. And we're going to switch our fingering around a little bit so it's a little bit easier to do. We're going to put our 1st finger on the B string 1st fret, our 2nd finger on the G string 2nd fret, and our 3rd finger on the E string 2nd fret. Now just like the D chord, it's a 4-string chord, so the D string is going to be open and we're not going to use our A string or our E string. Let's see what that looks like on the guitar. Our next 7th chord is going to be D7. Now if we take our D major chord, remember it was this way, that kind of looks like an upside down triangle. What we're going to do is we're going to make it into a right side up triangle, taking that 3rd finger, sliding it up the B string to the 1st fret. Now that's kind of impossible with our 1st and 2nd finger in the way. So we're going to switch those fingers around so it's a little bit easier. So our 1st finger is going to go on the B string 1st fret, our 2nd finger on the G string 2nd fret, and our 3rd finger on the E string 2nd fret. And just like our D major chord, we're only going to strum 4 strings. So skip the top 2 strings and D7. Next up is our A7 chord. Now let's continue to take what we know and add in what we know about 7th chords. So our A chord has an A, a C sharp, and an E. It sounds like this. And on the fretboard, we would have put our fingers in this type of a pattern. Now to get an A7 chord, we're going to add our our additional third on top of our A chord, and then we get this type of a sound. To change our fretboard around, we're going to remove this middle note. And we're going to change our fingering to our 1st finger on the D string 2nd fret, and we're going to put our 2nd finger on the B string 2nd fret. The string in the middle is now open, the E string's also open, and this is a 5-string chord just like A is, so the A string is going to be open and the E string is not going to be used. Let's see how this is played on the guitar. Our next 7th chord is going to be A7. Now if we were to take our A major chord, remember that was 3 fingers starting from the D string, 1, 2, 3. We now are going to take out our middle finger and make it 1st finger, 3rd finger. Now that's one way to finger it, but the best way to finger it is with your 1st and 2nd finger. Your 1st finger on the D string 2nd fret, skip a string, 2nd finger on the B string 2nd fret, leave that G string open, and we're only going to strum 5 strings for the A7. The last 7th chord we're going to learn is E7. Now go ahead and start filling in where you feel comfortable filling in on your notes. Jump ahead as far as you want, and I'll fill in the gaps as we go. So we have our E chord, E, G sharp, and B. Sounds like this. And on our fretboard from our E chord, it looked like this. Now let's make it a 7th chord. Add your additional third. We're going to add a D in now. And on our fretboard, we're going to remove this finger right here, and we're going to use our 1st finger on the G string in the 1st fret, and our second finger on the A string in the second fret. Otherwise, just like E, it's a 6-string chord, so every other string is going to be an open string. Let's see how this sounds on the guitar. The last 7th chord is going to be E7. Now let's remember our E major chord. Remember, this was a 6-string chord, really beefy chord that we talked about, and we're going to take out our 3rd finger from that E chord. So our first finger is on the G string 1st fret, our second finger is on the A string 2nd fret, and no 3rd finger, leaving that D string open. Strum 6 strings for E7.
Let's review. The number one thing you need to remember about 7th chords is to add an additional 3rd to the major chords you already know. This concludes the video on dominant 7th chords. Keep practicing and remember that you can do anything you put your mind to. Keep rockin'. Shred out.